Welcome back to another episode of Kyle Sells Biz Off the Record. Every week we bring a special guest that has some expertise in business as it relates to mergers and acquisitions, business sales, and so on. Excited to have this week with us. We have a very special guest, Miss Mackenzie Childs. She's the owner and founder of Blink and Company, and I'm so glad we finally get a chance to speak because we we had a session scheduled previously, and I feel like everything just works out for the right reason, and this is a perfect timing, and everything, all the stars are aligned, and everything's working out perfectly, and we get a chance to have a nice chat today. So, Ms. Childs is an industrial and organizational psychologist. So.
Yes.
We want to be able to unpack that today, right? So I'm looking forward to learn a lot more about what you do and how you help businesses become more organized and become more streamlined and efficient in their business. Our topic today is from due diligence to integration, leveraging multi-generational performance alignment for a smoother M&A transaction. So before I turn over to you, Mackenzie, I'd like to hear a little bit of how you got to where you at, and then we're going to get into our subject matter. Um, we have a lot to unpack in a short space of time, so I would encourage each and one that's listening. So we are streaming on multiple platforms. Enter your comments or your questions in the comments box. We do our best to answer them. If we can't, we'll make sure to follow up after the segment is over. So tell us more about you, Mackenzie, how you got to where you at, and tell us a little bit more what you do.
Definitely. Well, thank you for having me, Kyle. My journey was interesting at best. So, I really am just focused on human behavior and always have been. So, for me, it was first getting out of my bachelor's. I have two bachelor's degrees and was really focused in the psychology space, not really knowing what I wanted to do. I worked in outpatient autism clinics. I was a behavioral specialist for a school district outside of Houston and just learned a lot about behavior in the raw. I wanted to go to occupational therapy school, learned how much that would cost as a early 20 something, right? And then declined the offer. My mom was livid about that.
Can you
And then
imagine?
Oh, yeah, and then just took off some time and really focused in on human behavior. So, what I was noticing is as I was working in these spaces, I worked in nonprofit, I worked in corporate, I worked in healthcare, and then also as these behavioral specialists, I was noticing that as I was working with these people on behavior, my supervisors or really the company as a whole wasn't really understanding human behavior to keep us motivated and to keep us in our jobs. And so I was like, okay, if human behavior does this for children in and amazing things, amazing breakthroughs, imagine what it could do in the business world. So I went back to school, got my master's at University of Southern California, studied under some really amazing rock stars, and eventually morphed my business into what it is today. All of these things were really pre-COVID. And then I graduated May of 2020. So in the height of all of the crazy, right? And started out executive coaching for emotional intelligence, went through some other iterations, and then really focused on this performance piece, which emotional intelligence is a large facet of. So that's kind of how I got to be where I am. I've worked in all kinds of different industries and have worked with professionals in other industries and have landed on public accounting and really law firms as my specialty.
Awesome. So that's a lot there that we have to unpack, but it's a very impressive journey. Just that's the two BAs that scares you a little bit, not to mention the MBA. But let's jump into the subject matter here. Let's talk a little bit about aligning multi-generational goals. So one question I have for you, and you could take this anywhere you like, but one question is, how do you get all employees to work towards the company's business goals? Everyone has their sometimes a lot of companies don't have their goals aligned with the employees, don't have their core values shared with the employees. Everyone seems to be going in a different direction and don't understand what the purposes of the business and that they're working in. But how do you get all employees to work in the same direction towards the company's business goals?
Yeah, awesome question. I have the privilege of working under some really amazing people, and I was really just learning at this point, and my mentor said, "Okay, you want to ask two questions. The first one is, what is your purpose?" And that's just getting everybody to, decide on the same page. And this is in regards to, you're talking to all the stakeholders in the company, right? And or the leadership. But the second question is the most important of, does everybody understand that purpose? And can everybody understand that purpose, right? And so once you ask those two questions, it really opens up a whole slew of discussion for, oh my gosh, maybe our goals aren't really what our goals are, things like that. And the example I really like to use is, JFK goes into NASA and he asks the janitor, "What do you do here?" And the janitor responds with, "I help get people to the moon." And that's what we're really looking for. He didn't answer, "I take out the trash, I clean the toilets,
Right.
whatever." He didn't answer that way. He said, "I help get people to the moon." So our main focus is getting that clear on a purpose and a meaning for these public accountants and lawyers that come through these firms. Why? Because of how they do their succession. They pick their partners from within the firm. That meaning and purpose is so important to understand who your leadership is going to be at some point. And then it also just drives everything, regardless of whether or not you want to move up that ladder.
So I get that, and I wrote down those two questions here. Having the workforce know the purpose, and do they understand? Do the employees understand the purpose? What are some of the challenges that you see in just making sure the workforce is aligned? So let's say they don't understand the purpose, or let's say there's some misalignment there. Like, what are some of the challenges you see working with companies?
Well, as we're talking about multi-generational things, right?
Right.
That in itself is a challenge, because you've got people that have their own agenda of why they wanted to come work for this company. And as we see, I'm going to use public accounting a lot because that's really on the brain right now in this season. But I've got these younger workers coming into my public accounting client space, and money matters for them, right?
Hmm.
They got their finance degree because they want to make the money, but it's not necessarily who they are. They are creatives, they are artists, they are musicians, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, you don't wake up one day saying, "I'm going to be a public accountant." It's just not a childhood dream.
Right.
You do it because you want to pay the bills, and because you might enjoy the validation of getting the balance sheet right at the end of at the end of the task. And so what we're seeing though is that these these younger workers are not necessarily getting those degrees, right? They are, but there's also a huge gig economy that's pulling them in that direction. And 50% of our Gen Z workers want full-time contract work, right?
Hmm.
Then we've got the older generation over here that wants everybody to come back to the office. They want, pre-COVID values and standards and things like that. And it's causing a lot of dissension between the two workers, where the millennials are just kind of caught in the middle, and
Hmm.
they're trying to work both sides. And when it comes to M&A, I mean, for in particular, one of my clients had an older clientele and older staff that they merged with a younger clientele and staff.
Hmm.
And so this became super apparent very quickly that they were not on the same page of, what is our purpose and does everybody understand that purpose? Um, but across the board, money matters to all people. So
Hmm.
if we can get clear on that, and then establish a meaning and purpose, then most people won't leave. Now, also, what we're seeing is, per the pandemic, a lot of older workers left. They retired early. They
Hmm.
were not they were not willing to ride that wave.
Yep, yep.
But what left with them was the institutional knowledge, the expertise, and the loyalty. And then we're seeing, 50% of those, Gen Z workers wanting to do more contract work, which is great, but that means less people coming into these professional services firms. And then getting a CPA license is just not sexy anymore. Like, it's just not a thing. And so really the bigger challenge is the mindset change on from recruitment to retention,
Hmm.
and understanding that it's more important now to retain that older, more highly skilled talent than maybe less focus on retention, or less focus on recruitment, really.
Yeah, let's stay on that. I want to actually want to get into that knowledge transfer, that knowledge exchange between the seasoned employees to the younger workforce. A lot of times when I'm onboarding or consult with new clients, we do want to understand the demographic and the ages of the staff, as well as demographic of their client base as well. So for example, if you have majority of employees approaching retirement, the company that's acquiring that business is going to lose some of that knowledge, right? Some of that experience because they're close to retirement or retiring
Mhm.
soon, and they're not going to be able to retain that talent. So in the situation that you mentioned before, I believe was it two CPA practices that were merging,
Mhm.
and they acquired a company with, is that a younger workforce? Is that correct?
They acquired an older
Oh,
workforce.
they acquired an older workforce. Well, that's actually pretty good then.
It was
Did I-
interesting. It
yeah.
was
Okay.
interesting. So, typically, and I'm sure you know this, when you have a same industry merger,
Yeah.
acquisition, whatever, 30% of that workforce is deemed redundant, right?
Yes.
Around that number. So it was interesting to get in there and get creative on the accountability chart, right? The
Hmm.
organizational chart. Where does everybody stand? And my very first M&A client, I came in after everything was pretty much solidified, and then 7 months after they actually did get into the same office and everything, and we were able to save 10% of their workforce, which saved them a little north of $300,000. But then it became very clear to me around, okay, what if I was more in the due diligence phase, and then these things were taken care of, the knowledge transfer and everything was taken care of in the due diligence
Hmm.
phase, and then just really tested in the post merger phase, right? So basically what I do now is I sit down with them and I say, okay, we're going to go over your accountability chart, whether they follow the EOS model or, some strategy, like that. We go through and I say, okay, you're public accountants. Not all of them are going to want to manage people,
Right.
right? So, can we create what's called a dual career ladder where you have more or less a trainer track, or what I like to call a supervisor track,
Hmm.
and then you have a management track, and they're equitable in compensation? Now, the supervisor track will cap out because the management track is then going to, be more eligible for partner, because partner is really, you got to have that EQ, you got to do the business development kind of thing, right? And you
Right.
got to manage people. So, yes, it will cap out, but it doesn't cap out down here. And so now we've got a built-in training system that all we have to do is decide what learning and development we want to push out that year. And we have built in supervisors, trainers, coaches that have this track that are in charge of AI reskilling, right? If we want to do something like that, or any other type of training based on their industry expertise. Maybe we've got some that are really skilled in oil and gas, and we've got some that are really not skilled in oil and gas. And now they know who to go to for that resource management, which is another, challenging trend that we're seeing right now. So we're able to build that in before they merge and then test that viability after they merge. And all with the mindset of, if people know that you're doing this equitable compensation track, highly skilled talent will flock to you because they're like, oh, well, I don't have to manage people, but I can still get paid, as much
Hmm.
as a manager, right? And just
Right.
train people. I'm down for that. I want to be validated for my expertise and knowledge that I have accrued over, certain number of years. And so we're able to really track that knowledge transfer, understand where those cascading messages come from, look at the delegation system. And then, because I have, my background in behavior, is it going to work based on this person's communication style, based on, a whole different slew of personality concepts and just, you know, psychology, right?
So I like that. I like the way you're thinking. Now, my question is, are your clients primarily being acquired, or are your clients typically the company that's acquiring other business? So essentially, do you prefer to work with companies that are merging into other firms and you're looking to review the talent and help with the integration and alignment, or do you prefer to be on the other side of the fence, so to speak, and
You
preparing
know,
for an exit?
I would rather work for the ones that are looking to acquire, and then bridging the gap between the two in the due diligence phase around, these are your people. So working with that human valuation phase, right?
Mhm.
But looking at it from a different perspective, not necessarily how much it's worth, but like, who really does work there, and then how can we create this, everybody has a place type thing, where our workforce, we don't have to lose 30% of our workforce and then backtrack and try to say, oh, hey, we lost this, but we need to actually bring on these 25% more people because, hey, we messed up. And a perfect example of that is, going in and saying, hey, we want a HR department post merger. That's one of our goals, right? And if I'm in the negotiations of that, I can understand where that's going and what that would look like. And then I interview everybody from the receptionist to, the top stakeholders,
Mhm.
and this actually happened where one of my clients, they were talking about doing the HR firm. They were, an up and coming middle market, and they needed it. And they were bouncing around ideas of, okay, who could we recruit? Who do you know? What would this look like, kind of thing. And I'm just sitting there in the meeting, and I have some information in my back pocket, but I'm like, surely they know. Surely they know this information. And then they were throwing around solutions that were not privy to the information that I had. And so I stood up and I said, did you know that your receptionist has a master's in HR?
Mhm.
And that's a position that's deemed redundant, right? We don't need two receptionists whenever we merge these two companies. So one receptionist was able to keep her job, and the other one, after we interviewed and made sure she was a good fit, was able to go into that HR role and has been doing fantastic.
Mhm. It's almost like, putting together the pieces of a puzzle, right? Some pieces fit better in certain places than others, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I don't think a lot of, especially some of the companies that have been around a long time, sometimes they haven't, when they onboarded, um, sometimes it's hard to find talent. So you just, hey, I need a receptionist, or I need a dispatcher or a manager. And they may not be the ideal person for the job, but you just have that vacancy that you need to get filled because you're losing potentially money or revenue because that person fills a need in your company. And, I'm just gonna have them do this job. I'll figure out what happens down the road. But at some point you have to reevaluate your team.
Hmm.
Um, I know we're getting close to our time here. Um, any key takeaways, any suggestions or tips that you want to share with companies that are merging or assessing their talent? Any key takeaways you can share with our listening audience?
You know, I I create a phasic approach, and I'm really good at project management, right? If there's no talk around how you're going to do this change management of your people, right? Maybe of the systems and what they use, but the systems aren't really going to make sense if the right people aren't there to use it. So it's really important to understand who's working for you, where they fit in. And so you don't really have to go into this post-merger lull phase where it's, the worst numbers you've ever seen. And usually I mean, that happens for the clients that call me. So some people do it really well, and I can also get in there and just, hitch my rocket to their rocket, and then we go twice as fast.
I like that.
Yeah, but it's it's really important to understand who's working for you, how they can attribute, and then, those two questions at the beginning we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, HR due diligence is key. In my opinion, many of the other aspects, like the financials, there's a lot of aspects of a business when you're looking to do acquire or exit that can be fixed. But the people aspect is the toughest component, right? So that change management, that's something that you need as a professional like yourself to come in and evaluate. I would like to have you back. I'm actually going to be putting together a panel on the mergers and acquisition of professional services firms, and I'd love to have your expertise on this panel. I know we had a short bit of time to talk today, but we're going to dive into a little bit more the next time. Next time I'd love to have you back on and dive a little bit deeper. But I do appreciate your time. I did put your information in the comments where folks can get a hold of you, but for our listening audience, how can people get a hold of you, Mackenzie?
Yeah, so they can email me at Mackenzie@blink-company.com. I'm pretty quick to respond. And just shoot me an email, any questions, comments, concerns that they have. If I can't help them, I would love to refer them to somebody in my Rolodex that might be able to get them what they need.
And you work nationwide, right? It's correct.
I do, yes.
Awesome. So if you're listening to this anywhere in the country and you want to get a hold of Mackenzie to help with the realignment of your team in preparation for acquisition or merger, reach out to her. We definitely going to have her back on a more deeper dive on a panel specifically on acquisitions of professional services. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for making this happen today, and we're looking forward to having
Yes.
you back on the show again.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Thank you.